April Taylor played the mandolin like nobody's business. Although she was from Kentucky, the famous country music group from Fort Payne, Alabama, was her favorite group. April was 15 years old when she, her mom, sister, and brother went shopping for back-to-school clothes in August 1984. Her mom accidentally ran a stop sign, and April was killed. April's was my first funeral as a pastor. Stephanie Puckett was 12 years old. She attended our church's vacation Bible school. Stephanie had cystic fibrosis. I got a call one Saturday morning that Stephanie and her family were at Children's Hospital in Lexington. It didn't look good, and they didn't have a pastor. Would I come? I did, and Stephanie Puckett, age 12, was my second funeral as a pastor. April's parents and Stephanie's parents would have done anything to save them. Jairus' little girl was dying, and he would have done anything to save her. Luke, in his account of this story, made a point of saying this was Jairus' only daughter. And I think I know how tenderly Jairus loved her. Just look at him, this leader of the community, shamelessly prostrate at the feet of Jesus. Not too proud to ask for help, Jairus begged Jesus to come to his house and heal his little girl. His little girl was dying. Jesus agreed, and they turned toward the house of Jairus. But they didn't go straight there. Along the way, Jesus stopped suddenly and wheeled around. I felt power surge out of my body, he said, and Jesus asked, "Who touched me?" It turned out to be a woman who'd been hemorrhaging for 12 years. She was something of an outcast because of that medical problem. For cultural and even religious reasons, she was shunned by the community, considered unclean. She'd spent all she had running from doctor to doctor, but they couldn't stop her bleeding. Mark says she had spent all she had. And somewhere along the way, she had decided her last hope was this man from Nazareth, Jesus. This bleeding woman had worked her way to the front of the crowd and had reached out her hand and touched the hem of Jesus' robe. Jesus sensed power flow out of him, and he stopped in his tracks. He wanted to see the one who had touched him. So she gathered her courage, stepped out of the safety of the crowd, and threw herself at his feet. One of the most beautiful points in this story is when she looked up at Jesus and found in him not disgust, but tenderness. Daughter, he called her. He called her daughter. She had heard herself referred to as that woman. She had seen mothers steer their daughters away from her so as not to come in contact with her. But Jesus called her daughter. Daughter, he said, your faith has made you well. Back to Jairus. When we left him, he was leading Jesus to his house. "We must hurry," he must have been saying. "Out of our way," he must have said a dozen times. If he'd had a cell phone, Jairus would have called his distraught wife and said, "He's coming. Tell our little girl to hold on. Jesus is on the way." Then Jesus stopped to attend to a woman who was only bleeding, not dying. "Jesus, we must hurry," Jairus must have said, frustrated by this distraction. Imagine yourself in the back of an ambulance with your child. An automobile accident has left your little girl hanging on to life by a mere thread. The crew in the back of the ambulance is working furiously to keep her alive until you get to the hospital. You're praying frantically. You wish the driver would drive faster. Then, you can't believe what is happening. The ambulance pulls over. The crew hops out to help a lady who, as you see through the window, has fallen and hurt her leg. She's hurt, but her life is not in danger. "Get back in here," you cry. "We've got to get my little girl to the hospital." That's what Jairus must have felt like. Jesus was suddenly distracted by some woman who was simply bleeding. Does he not know that time is of the essence? Jairus had to be thinking. And then what he so deeply feared. Someone laid his hands on Jairus' shoulder and said, "Don't bother Jesus anymore. Your daughter just died. It's too late." But Jesus overheard the news and reassured the grief-stricken dad. "Don't be afraid," Jesus said. "Just believe." When they got to Jairus' house, the mourners already were wailing. But Jesus walked into the little girl's room and spoke. "Talitha kum," he said, "sit up." And she did. Jairus' only daughter was, once again, alive. There are lots of great truths in this two stories in one, including the power of Jesus over death. But I've sensed the need to focus on the hesitancy of the woman to step out of the crowd. She blended as best she could into that beehive of activity around Jesus. It seems to me she wanted to maintain her anonymity, not to be noticed. She felt that she couldn't just walk up to Jesus, not with her reputation as the bleeding woman, not with the stigma she bore. All she could bring herself to do was to try, at least try, without calling attention to herself, to touch His robe. It's gotten me to thinking, who else might want to remain anonymous among the crowd following Jesus? Who else might want to get close to Jesus without being noticed? Again, who else might want to remain anonymous among the crowd following Jesus? Who else might want to get close to Jesus without being noticed? Who, for example, might watch TV church instead of going to a church building? Let me pause and say, for whatever reason that you watch, thank you. We're glad you're with us. And I know there are lots of reasons people watch. Some of you watch because your work schedules prevent you from being in worship on Sundays. Some of you are not able to get out of the house. Some of you are in worship on Sundays and supplement your worship experience with TV church. Some of you gather with your families. And I think there must be some who watch TV church because you're just not comfortable going in person, at least yet, to a church building. There could be lots of reasons for that. Let me address a couple. Maybe you or someone you love has mental health problems. I've become interested in mental health and how churches might do better ministry among those who have mental health difficulties. I just finished Not Quite Fine, a book by Carleen Hill Byron. Ms. Byron suffers with mental health problems, is a devoted follower of Jesus, and writes about her difficulty plugging into a local church. Afraid of missing a social cue and doing the wrong thing. Afraid that people would see her illness and not really see her. Afraid of being ostracized. Ms. Byron has helped me see how uncomfortable someone who has a mental health problem might be going to church, whether it's anxiety, depression, bipolar, or any other struggle. I understand why someone might be uncomfortable going to a church. Now, I know it's complicated, but I'm going to be encouraging our own church to figure out how to better welcome and accommodate people whose mental health is a struggle. Would you help people like me figure this out? Would you talk with a pastor near you about your hesitancy, perhaps because of your mental health problems or those of someone you love? I don't want people to remain in the proverbial shadows because of mental health problems. Some people who hesitate to go to church have mental health problems, and I know there are some people who hesitate to go to church because they feel ashamed. They've made choices they know are wrong. So embarrassed, they stay away from church. There was a post making its way around social media a few weeks ago titled, "Grace and Mercy." Here are a few lines from that post. You got hammered at the bar on Saturday but came to church on Sunday? Well, you can sit with me. You're right where you need to be. You're a drug addict but came to church on Sunday? You can sit with me. You're right where you need to be. You're divorced and the last church you attended condemned you for it? Well, you can sit with me. You're right where you need to be. I love that little piece. It's a beautiful reminder of the corny but beautiful saying, church is a hospital for sinners, not a hotel for saints. Please hear me. I want to speak to the person who wants to go to a church service but is embarrassed. Your heart longs for God, but you're ashamed and you're afraid. You're afraid those good church folks will see the guilt on your face, or maybe they'll even know your stories, and you're afraid they will judge you. Well, let me be honest. I cannot guarantee that no one will look at you with a self-righteous, judgmental spirit. I wish I could, but I can't. And yet I know there are lots of Jesus followers who won't look at you like that. There are lots of Christian people who will say, here, sit with me. You got drunk last night. You came here straight from finishing your jail sentence for fraud. Your family has shunned you. Well, sit with me. You're right where you need to be. And if you have not found those people and that church, please don't stop looking. Be courageous. Go find the family of faith you need and long for. You need them, and they need you. When I come back in a few minutes, I'm going to talk about a man named Bibi who was afraid to go into the church and would listen through the windows from the safety of his car.
Don Webster is the Community Relations Coordinator for HIMSI. Don, we appreciate you letting us do TV Church here today.
Well, thank you. We're more than happy to have you here and have your crew and the pastor here, and it means a lot to us.
You mean a lot to us. How many years have you done this?
Well, I've actually been in the ambulance industry here in Madison County for 51 years. HIMSI was actually created in 1981, so I've been here since the inception of that.
You all deal with a lot of hard issues. Your paramedics deal with overdoses daily in Madison County.
Right now in Madison County, we're seeing about 2.3 overdoses every 24 hours. Mm-hmm. And in that, we're seeing about 10 deaths a month. And so it's very sad, and but we try to work not only from taking care of these patients, but trying to get them help and give them resources that they can go to once they have, recovered from their overdose.
When your paramedics deal with those tough issues, deaths, how do you help them out after that?
Well, naturally, it's one of those things you want to put your arms around them and hug them, and everybody deals with death and the terrible injuries that they see from time to time in different ways. But you got to be careful bringing religion to work and those kind of issues. So some people just brush it off, want to go right back to work, want to go right back to the next call. Some need to go home, some need to go seek some professional help. And so you just have to play it by ear. There's not really a script, there's not really a cookie cutter answer for it because everything's different.
On the flip side, you get to save lives and even deliver babies every now and then.
That is one of the highlights of it, delivering a good, healthy baby. So that is a good part, but it's tough on these people mentally as well as physically, but it's exciting and you got to have a passion for it. You've got to love to help people.
I don't know what we would do without you all.
Well, we have a good team and we are very excited for them.
And often first on the scene.
We are. We have Huntsville, Madison County, which we're urban, but we do have our first responders are great, our firefighters, our volunteer firefighters, and we have great support from the community.
Travis is talking today about Jairus. He was taking Jesus to heal his daughter who was dying and then was diverted. Does that ever happen to you all? You're on one call and get pulled to another call?
We are, quite frequently. And because, you never know where that next emergency is going to be or the severity of it. We're fortunate through our 911 communication center that they triage those calls by asking a lot of questions when somebody, calls 911. They're asking a lot of questions. And then also when the first responders arrive, the volunteer firefighters or the Huntsville Fire or Madison Fire arrive on scene, they can give us a status of the severity of it. But yes, sometimes we may be going to a sick call where somebody's hurt their leg or something like that, and then 5 minutes later you get a call of a major accident 2 blocks away. So you're going to divert to the higher acuity.
Yes, and someone's going on a call right now.
Somebody's going on a call right now. So.
Well, Don, we appreciate you and all the men and women who work for HIMSI.
Well, thank you, and we appreciate everything that First Baptist Church of Huntsville does.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
When Jesus had again crossed over by boat to the other side of the lake, a large crowd gathered around him while he was by the lake. Then one of the synagogue leaders, named Jairus, came, and when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet. He pleaded earnestly with him, "My little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so that she will be healed and live." So Jesus went with him. A large crowd followed and pressed around him. And a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had. Yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, because she thought, "If I just touch his clothes, I will be healed." Immediately her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. At once, Jesus realized that power had gone out from him. He turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" "You see the people crowding against you," his disciples answered, "and yet you can ask, 'Who touched me?'" But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet and, trembling with fear, told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." While Jesus was still speaking, some people came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader. "Your daughter is dead," they said. "Why bother the teacher anymore?" Overhearing what they said, Jesus told him, "Don't be afraid, just believe." He did not let anyone follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they came to the home of the synagogue leader, Jesus saw a commotion, with people crying and wailing loudly. He went in and said to them, "Why all this commotion and wailing? The child is not dead, but asleep." But they laughed at him. After he had put them all out, he took the child's father and mother and the disciples who were with him, and went in to where the child was. He took her by the hand and said to her, "Talitha, cum," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, get up." Immediately the girl stood up and began to walk around. She was 12 years old. At this, they were completely astonished. He gave strict orders not to let anyone know about this, and told them to give her something to eat.
I love the book, Same Kind of Different as Me. It is an inspiring and beautiful true story. Denver Moore wrote about growing up in Louisiana, being passed around from family member to family member. For a while, when Denver was about 6 years old, he lived with his father. His father went by the nickname BB. BB was popular with the ladies, a womanizer. That's why Denver said that when BB took his son, Denver, to the new Mary Magdalene Baptist Church, they wouldn't go inside. They remained outside. Some of BB's girlfriends, you see, were members of the congregation. Instead of going into worship like everybody else, BB would pull his Pontiac automobile up next to the little church house. The pastor would ease over and discreetly raise the window next to where BB and Denver would park. They would sit out there in the car and listen to the music and to the preaching. Little Denver couldn't see inside the church, but he learned the words to the songs, and sometimes he would sing along. Denver remembered that the folks inside seemed mighty enthusiastic. After the sermon, the choir would sing, and they would take up the offering. An offering plate would appear out the window. BB would drop in some coins, and the plate would disappear to back inside the church house. BB and Denver were on the outside, looking in, on the periphery of the church, playing it safe by not getting in the middle of things. Like that lady in today's Bible story who bore the stigma of the constant bleeding and remained hidden for so long in the crowd. I'm not condoning BB's womanizing, mind you. I am appealing to anyone who's hanging out on the periphery of the Christian family, still hiding among the crowd, not wanting to stand out, maybe staying home altogether. The fact that you are watching this tells me your heart longs for more, to belong. Maybe this story of the woman who finally wanted to be healed so badly her desperation became greater than her fear. This story of a woman who stepped out of the crowd and found healing. Maybe her story will encourage you. Take the risk and find those good folks who will embrace you with open arms and extend grace and mercy to you. Those folks who will say, "Sit here, sit right here with me." Jesus loves you so much, He died for your sins. Your place in His heart and your value in His eyes are not determined by your behavior. In His presence, you are always welcomed. You don't have to hide.
Hello, and thanks for joining us. I'm Tim Boone, Minister of Missions at First Baptist Huntsville. To be a follower of Jesus means that you're on mission. God calls all of us to join our hearts with God's heart for the world. I hope that you'll join us as we seek to be the church in the heart of the city, with a heart for the region and for the world. You can visit the missions page on our website to find different ways to serve right where you are, or you can join us as we travel outside of our city and throughout our world. You can also email me at tim@fbchsv.org. I'd love to hear from you.